suspects are being one case involves. The FBI is now offering $100,000 to see if the police are releasing.
Welcome to Misty Mysteries. I'm your host Keely, and this is a paranormal and true crime podcast. Today's episode is about healthcare workers and their paranormal experiences. It's going to be a very ghost-filled episode.
Are you on the hunt for indie podcasts with a dark side, but you're not quite ready to commit to subscribing to a new pod? Why not wet your beak with Spotlight on Darkcast? Each week we drop a new episode from one of the many shows on the Darkcast network. Here you'll find true crime, brew crime, petty crime, retro horror, classic horror, true horror, spree killers, thrill killers, serial killers, breakfast serial killers, true paranormal, histories, mysteries, frauds, cheats, swindlers, two-timers, double-timers, four-flushers, cryptids, cryptography, astrology, virology, pathology, epidemiology, and people that fuck around with Ouija boards. Explore Spotlight on Darkcast. It's like dozens of superlative indie podcasts in one weekly package, and it can be found wherever you listen to podcasts. Spotlight on Darkcast. Fuck around and find out.
Healthcare workers can vary from many different job opportunities, from cleaning crews, billing and coding, medical assistants, nurses, techs like lab, ultrasound, or x-ray, paramedics, and doctors. There are obviously many different positions and names for them, but what I know is that healthcare workers are very hard workers. I used to work as a medical assistant, and I know that their days are very unpredictable, especially when you throw in patients from the other side or coworkers no longer with us. Hospitals and healthcare facilities are definitely among some of the most haunted places in the world. Look at how many old asylums and hospitals are in the list of just America's most haunted places. These places see some of the best moments of people's lives, like meeting your child or a new family member for the first time, to some of the worst moments, like saying goodbye to your loved one or hearing about a life-changing medical condition. Sadly, most healthcare facilities see the worst moments over the best, and you can only imagine the type of energy and spirits that hang around. I'm sure there are countless patients who have stories with spirits, but today let's talk about the people who spend more time than most in these places helping people. The first story I want to share comes from a listener named Sissy. Sissy is so supportive of the podcast and so many other indie podcasters as well, which is why I was so excited when she let me share her story. Now, here's the story. One of the paramedic stations my husband worked at was legit haunted. One day my husband and his partner were out on a call. Given it was a hot day in WV, I walked into the air-conditioned station. Now, when you walked into the station, you entered into a small alcove. To the right were the bedrooms, and to the left was the living room and the kitchen down a small hallway. So I'm sitting in the living room when I hear the door open and close. I figured it was my husband and his partner coming back in. I sit there waiting for them to say something as I am hearing footsteps come down the hall. Now I start to get this creeped out feeling. I get up and I start saying hello over and over again. Nothing. So I make my way down the hall and I begin checking rooms. Nothing. Now I start really freaking out. So I make my way back to the living room and I sit down. I just start saying over and over again, it was just your imagination, though I knew it was not. About 20 minutes later, my husband and his partner come into the station. My husband takes one look at me and says, "You heard it, didn't you?" Apparently, what I had experienced was normal. My husband and his partner went on to tell me that they hear all kinds of things nightly. My husband even said that he slept facing the wall as he didn't want to see whatever was prowling around. No one knows who or what it was. It could have been a spirit they brought back. It could have been someone attached to the property. Honestly, I'd love to research more and find out. I just knew I wasn't alone that day. Sissy's story sounds terrifying, and it makes me very curious if the spirit is attached to the land or followed paramedic after a quiet call. I want to thank Sissy again for letting me tell her story, and I hope it spooked you just as much as it did me. My next few stories are from a Reddit thread about nurses and doctors' ghostly encounters. The first encounter is definitely one to make you rethink working on a children's floor, and it reads, I worked in a pediatric hospital and had always heard that the 4th floor right outside our oncology unit was haunted. I worked 3 12-hour shifts normally, but would pick up overtime and pick up a night shift. I was working in the NICU, which happened to also be on the 4th floor, but on the opposite side. The oncology unit had a staircase that was a shortcut down to the cafeteria, which was on the 2nd floor. At about 3 a.m., I was ready to take a short break, and I wanted a cup of coffee from the cafeteria, so I decided to take that staircase. I walked through the automatic double doors, and I saw a child skipping down the hall. I called out to him as I was afraid a little kid had snuck out of a patient's room. As soon as I called out to him, he turned, and in the blink of an eye, totally vanished. A lot of the other nurses and doctors had seen that same little kid skipping in the same hallway. Of course, I chalked it up to just exhaustion and didn't really think about it much after, but you are damn sure I didn't use that hallway at night ever again. This Redditor, after being asked by multiple people, shared that she remembers the little boy being dressed in shorts. Ghost children for me are always one of the creepiest, especially just thinking about how darker entities will mimic or present themselves as children, but these next few stories feel equally as scary and revolve around nursing homes. The first story reads, I don't know where to start. I worked in geriatrics, a nursing home, for years, so most of our patients died within a few years of being with us. Anyways, I had this one patient move into one of the rooms on my hall that a previous patient had just passed away in. My new patient kept calling at night, saying that there was this woman who kept coming into her room and trying to talk to her. At first, I just passed it off on her being in her 90s and struggling with dementia, so I assured her that I would lock her door at night to make sure no one could come in. After about a week of this continuing to happen, I sat down with her and was asking her what this woman looked like, thinking she might be hallucinating her daughter or sister or someone else. And she proceeded to tell me that this woman had a pink robe on with fuzzy blue slippers and her hair up in curlers. And the woman would come in and sit on the foot of her bed, pat the new patient's feet, and try to talk to her. But she couldn't understand what she was saying. I almost pissed myself. The patient that I had in the room prior to that new one went to bed every night in her pink robe, blue slippers, and her hair in curlers. It stopped after about 2 weeks. After reading this one, I've been wondering what she was trying to say to the new patient, and I wonder why it stopped after 2 weeks. But now for the second nursing home story. Working in a nursing home and long care facility for multiple years, personally, I hadn't experienced anything too crazy apart from mysterious call lights, electrical issues, hearing doors open and close, toilets flush by themselves, faucets running. Other staff had some more direct experiences, though. Apparently in one hall, a little girl would occasionally be seen walking. This had been reported by multiple other staff members as well as patients. And a staff member was sitting out in her car during a night shift when some woman knocked on her window and quickly disappeared. The next day, she was discussing this out loud with the oncoming shift when someone pulled out a picture from old files based on the description provided. Apparently, it was a match for a former patient had passed away at least 10 years before that staff member was hired. These stories are crazy, and I feel like working at a nursing home definitely is a hard job, especially like the previous Redditor mentioned, you do lose your patients. In my next story, this person also experienced losing a patient, but it stopped her nursing career before it even started. Growing up, my maternal grandmother and I were always pretty sensitive to paranormal stuff, but my mom was not. She thought her mom was a croak, and she was sure I was making stuff up. So while my mom was in nursing school, she worked as a home health aide. She got a pretty cushy gig working with this woman named Mary. I was too young to know what was wrong with Mary, but looking back now, I would guess she was probably the mental age of 5, even though she was in her 50s. Mary's parents had provided well for her, left her with her own giant, beautiful home, fully equipped and accessible for her, and enough money for financial care and etc. So Mom was one of the only 4 staff to work with Mary because she did not like new people. 2 night staff and 2 day staff. She received around-the-clock care, but Mom was also able to bring Mary home with her, and we spent some time with her as a family. Mary was very sweet and very kind. I actually have an old photo of me, her, and my mom when I was dressed for one of my dance parades. We all loved her to death. One morning, on a day my mom was off work but had school, she got up in a rush and ran downstairs. I thought she was late for school, so I went down with her to help her get what she needed to leave, but she was on the phone, dialing people who were not answering her. I will never forget this. Mom was shaking and crying, blubbering to herself without making any real sense. She finally slammed the phone down on the table and put her hands on her face. I asked her what was wrong. She told me that she had woke up to Mary at her bedside, patting her hand the way she did when she was very pleased with something Mom did. But when she sat up in bed, Mary was gone. The phone rang, and it was the nurse at the house. Mary had passed away that night before she came to tell Mom goodbye. She still never believed in the paranormal, but she did quit nursing school and never worked in home health aid again. She never said, but I got the sense she couldn't handle another Mary happening to her. My mom was pretty stoic, but that broke her. This story was honestly to me just a very sad but sweet encounter. And I feel like we need that sometimes with the paranormal. It's so easy to remember how scary and spooky things can be, but it's also hard to remember that things can be very sweet and it can just be someone coming to say goodbye or someone trying to take care of you, you know? Now, this next story is the last story for the episode, and by far the creepiest that really left me wondering a lot about reality. This story reads, I'm a psychiatric nurse. Early in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. There was a resident I called Maroon Duchin. He was an elective mute, which means that he didn't, wouldn't, or couldn't speak, but there was no pathological findings as to why. He had spoken early in his life and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the notable exception of being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the Deep South and joined the military when he was 19. After boot camp, he was stationed somewhere in the South, and one night he vanished. He was declared AWOL for years, and he was finally declared missing and dead. 10 years later, a 7-foot-tall man walked into the VA hospital emergency room in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, my name is Maroon Duchin and I've been dead for 10 years. These are the last words he ever spoke. He was covered with dust and he had been wearing the same clothes he had been reported wearing the night he vanished. His social security number had not been used and he had no identification on his person. However, they were able to identify him, I guess via fingerprints. He was well fed and in good health except for his refusal to speak. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost loved one and whoever was claiming to be him could not be him. They said he was a stand-in for their dead relative and demanded not to be contacted again. He paced all day, every day, not in a frantic way, but just lumbering up and down the halls and outside. He smiled all the time and would be moving his mouth in a way that indicated talking or muttering, but he was dead silent. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open as if he were laughing wholeheartedly, but not even a breath would come out. If told to go to the dining room to eat, he'd go and eat, but if no one told him, he'd just keep pacing, never indicating hunger. If offered a cigarette, he'd smoke it in an oddly formal way, almost delicately, if that makes sense. But he never seemed to crave smoking. The man wanted nothing, and if I talked to him, he appeared to listen, periodically throwing his head back in laughter. There was nothing to do for this man. Various medications were tried, but they did not affect him either positively or negatively. Occupational therapy did nothing because he would just grin, and unless told to stay put, he would just get up and start pacing again. On the last day of that job, on my way to something better, the last thing I saw was him, pacing in the parking lot, throwing his head back to laugh. It made me wonder if I had been dealing with a ghost, and all these years later, I still don't know. This story is so weird to me because this whole story, he really sounded like he was just a regular patient. He lived there, she interacted with him, and it seemed like other staff interacted with him. I mean, they knew to give him medication, they knew to feed him. It seemed like he was really there, but yet, somehow, on her last day, he was in the parking lot doing the same thing. So it makes me wonder if he escaped that day, knowing maybe she was leaving. All these encounters just truly shocked me with how much detail and what they encountered. But I want to know what you think and hear any encounters of your own. You can do this by sending me messages on places like Twitter or Instagram. But for now, I want to thank you for listening, and I want to thank Sissy again for sharing her story and allowing me to read it on this episode. Don't forget to check out my merch, especially this new Gemini season merch, and use discount code June22 for 10% off until July 1st. Or use MMFriend for free shipping. Please stay safe out there, stay hydrated, and I will see you next week for a true crime episode.